Now, you got to remember that industrialization is a technological and a cultural revolution at its core. And just like any other kind of cultural or technical innovation, it diffuses similar to lots of other things that we've talked about in this class. The camel saddle, gunpowder, the printing press, Buddhism, Christianity, right? So the process of industrialization diffuses along trade routes and it diffuses along lines of communication similar to any other cultural trend. So within several decades, industrialization begins to diffuse beyond Western Europe. And just like any other cultural trend, as it comes into contact with new peoples and new societies, it begins to syncretize, it begins to change, similar to the way that Buddhism changed dramatically as it diffused from India into China, right? Now, industrialization itself is not the only thing it changes. It changes the societies that it comes into contact with as well. And this creates what's known as the second wave or the second industrial revolution. And this second industrial revolution is centered mainly in the Americas, in Russia, and in Japan. And as it diffuses into each of these new states and new societies, it's going to have differing effects based on the political climate, the social climate, the cultural way of life in those areas. Now, industrialization itself, as it enters this second wave, begins to move beyond heavy industries like steel, chemicals, railroads, and it begins to become more efficient and it begins to turn towards mass production of personal and consumer technology, right? As industrialization spreads, people continually invent, they innovate, they syncretize, and machines begin to get smaller and more efficient, right? We move away from the heavy duty, very, difficult to maintain steam engine. And you start to see things like the diesel engine, which is invented in Great Britain, which is small, which is, no, I mean, it's smaller than a steam engine. It's more efficient than a steam engine. It's not small by any means. But based off of the creation of the diesel engine, you then have engineers in Germany that create the internal combustion engine, which is what we use now to power modern day automobiles. So things are getting smaller, they're getting more efficient. This allows for the creation of personal consumer products, right? Now, one of the things that, or several of the things that don't change as industrialization spreads is the human and the environmental impact, right? Everywhere that industrialization goes, you see massive urbanization, you see plummeting living and working conditions, you see large scale pollution, and you see the spread of disease in urban areas. But on a larger scale, depending upon the conditions in these new states and these new societies that industrialization gets introduced into, man, I cannot talk tonight. There are differing political and social effects, and like I said, that's largely dependent on the society that it comes into contact with. So we're going to look at four different examples of this second wave of industrialization and talk about how each one deals with industrialization differently. God almighty, I can't talk tonight. All right, so the first place that we want to take a look at is Russia. Now, Russia is a large and militarily significant state in the 16th and 17th century. But because of their lack of involvement in the colonization of the Americas, they begin to fall behind in terms of their technical innovation. They begin to fall behind economically. They begin to fall behind, the other intellectual and cultural movements like the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Okay. Um, They do not have a large supply of colonies in the Americas the way that Western European states do. So they lack the influx of raw material that those states are able to take advantage of. So in the 18th and 19th century, as industrialization is making its way through Europe, the Russian government decides that they need to take drastic action to get caught up to these Western European states, which are benefiting so incredibly from industrialization. Okay. So the Russian government commits to a massive overhaul of the economy in Russia. And the first step in doing this is that the Tsar, the Emperor of Russia, once and for all legally puts an end to feudalism, and he frees the serfs or the peasants from their feudal contracts and obligations. And culturally, this is a huge upheaval in Russia. Russian feudalism had been firmly entrenched in that country going all the way back to Byzantine times. And once he frees the peasants from their feudal obligations, just like in Western Europe during the Renaissance and after the Crusades, this frees a huge portion of the population to move out of the countryside, to move out of rural areas, and they begin to urbanize into major cities very, very quickly, right? Now, with this influx of populations into cities, industrialization is now possible, right? But the Russian government takes a far more socialist approach to it. Rather than allowing private businesses and private ownership of factories, industrialization is 100% directed by the government in Russia. So you're talking government owned factories, you're talking forced relocations by the government to provide workers for these industrialized factories. And this leads to massive unrest among the working class in Russia. There are protests, there are riots, there are rebellions. Many of the working class violently attack government offices, and the Russian government and the Tsar are basically forced, in order to quiet this growing revolution in Russia, they are forced to begin to introduce some democratic reforms into what had been one of the most absolutist governments in all of Europe, right? So they begin to reform the democracy. They begin to reform the monarchy. They begin to set some limits on the power of the czar. They also create a representative legislative body known as the Duma. Although at different times in Russian history, the Duma has more power and less power based on who the czar is. Many czars just openly ignore the Duma and continue on ruling as absolute monarchs. And because of this uneven relationship between the monarchy and the representative bodies of the people, you start to see a large socialist movement take hold in Russia. And socialist societies begin to become very influential in local government, especially in what's known as the workers' councils, which are called Soviets. And down the line, this is going to lead to a socialist revolution under the Bolshevik Party led by Lenin in the later years of World War One. So industrialization in Russia has massive consequences for not only the people, but also the government coming soon. Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have the United States. The United States, even with the American Revolution, still has very close cultural and trade connections to Western Europe, especially France. France and the United States are seen as kind of democratic brethren. The French supported the American Revolution. The American Revolution inspired the French Revolution. Um, even even the United States even has still strong ties with Great Britain at this point. So because of that, industrialization diffuses to the United States really quickly, and in fact, if we're going to be honest, rather painlessly. Okay. um, One of the other advantages that the United States has in industrializing is that it's barely scratched its potential by the 18th and 19th century. Um, the continent of North America has massive available land and resources that are untapped. And unlike Western Europe, where land is scarce and resources are quickly depleted because of the size of the continent, the United States has no such limitations. And within about a century, they're going to become one of the most influential economic industrial powerhouse countries in the world. Now, the socialist approach that's taken in Russia is not popular in the United States. In the United States, industrialization is mainly driven by private business with very negligible government direction and government oversight. And because of the continuous stream of cheap labor that is immigrating to the United States from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and Asia, industrialization spreads like wildfire. Um, the lack of government regulation in the United States means that the private ownership of business and the private ownership of the means of production is going to lead to more competition. It's going to lead to massive technical innovation. This is the era of Edison and the light bulb and Nikola Tesla and all of the amazing inventions that come out of New Jersey in the early part of the 20th century. But it also leads to massive business monopolies. It also leads to incredibly widespread consumer culture. Modern day advertising is an American invention. And it creates this economic superclass in the United States known as the robber barons, which you guys will talk about a whole bunch next year in A Push. And these robber barons are just absolute titans of industry. These are people like Andrew Carnegie, or Carnegie, however you want to pronounce it. These are people like John D. Rockefeller. These are people who are able to monopolize entire industries. Um, John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, um, in the 19th and early part of the 20th century, is essentially the largest privately owned corporation that has ever existed. Its annual income was greater than that of probably 80% of the rest of the political states in the world. You also have consolidation in other industries like banking, right? This is the era of JP Morgan and the creation of Chase Bank, who becomes so large that in the late 1800s, um, JP Morgan actually keeps the United States government afloat financially by providing them an interest free loan from his own personal wealth. So, that should give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of the, size and scope of this economic superclass. Now, with all of this business monopoly comes, heavy duty exploitation of the working class. This is, very similar to what goes on in Western Europe. But what you don't see in the United States is large scale unrest by the working class. Socialism never really takes hold in the United States. And a lot of that is cultural, because the United States is so ethnically diverse between immigration from Europe, between the freeing of the slaves, between the still remaining Native American population. Um, Most of these ethnicities and these kind of enclave communities in which they live in, um, don't allow the working class to unite across a broader spectrum. They remain divided by their national loyalties, their religious loyalties, and that prevents them from preventing capitalist exploitation on a large scale. Right. So, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about in terms of the scale of capitalism and the scale of business monopoly in the United States. So, this picture represents what happens to John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company when it's forcibly broken up by the United States government in 1911, because it had become the only provider of oil products in the United States and most of Latin America as well. So in 1911, the United States government takes John D. Rockefeller to court and they forcibly break up his company. And it breaks into, as you can see here, 7 different independent oil companies, right? Standard Oil of New Jersey, New York, California, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, and the Ohio Oil Company. And over the next century, those companies become essentially the top 5 or 6 leading oil companies internationally, right? So Standard Oil, once it breaks up, becomes Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, British Petroleum, and Marathon, right? So if you think for a minute about the gas stations in and around where you live, you are probably, I mean, you're going to find it hard to find a gas station that isn't supplied by one of these 5 or 6 companies. I mean, this is how large Standard Oil was. I mean, it was, at least in the Americas, the only supplier of oil products, meaning gasoline, meaning heating oil, sorry, meaning any kind of petroleum products. I mean, this was the company, the largest company in the world. And this kind of just goes to show you how far laissez-faire capitalism and industrial production can be taken when it's just left untouched by government.